Welcome to Nachtmeier Witness. Some nights feel wrong before anything happens. The air feels heavy, the room feels colder, and somewhere in the dark, you get the strange feeling that you are being watched. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who became witnesses to things they never expected to see. Some saw someone standing in the shadows. Some heard voices with no one nearby. Others found themselves in places that did not feel real at all. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, dark atmosphere, subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. Get comfortable. The night has already begun. I worked in a hospital, and over the years I saw many things that most people would never want to see. Hospitals are places where the worst parts of life often arrive without warning. People come in after accidents, heart attacks, overdoses, infections, and years of neglect. Medical staff are trained to stay calm, follow procedures, and focus on what needs to be done. You learn to separate your feelings from the job because the patient in front of you still needs help, no matter how shocking the situation is. Even with all that training, some cases stay with you. This was one of them. The patient was a man who weighed around 650 pounds. He was brought to the hospital by emergency health services. Before he even entered the department, we knew moving him was going to be difficult. A normal stretcher and a normal-sized team would not be enough. Everything had to be planned around his weight and size. It took 12 people to move him safely. That alone should give some idea of the situation. 12 trained adults had to work together just to transfer one man onto a stretcher. Everyone had to position themselves carefully because one wrong movement could injure the patient or the staff. People could strain their backs, lose their balance, or become trapped if the weight shifted suddenly. We used the strongest equipment available, but even then, the process was difficult. His body had been in the same position for so long that moving him caused pain and revealed damage that had remained hidden beneath him. The smell reached us before we fully understood what we were looking at. Hospital workers become familiar with unpleasant smells. Blood has a smell. Infection has a smell. Urine, stool, vomit, burns, and dead tissue all have their own smells. After enough time in healthcare, you learn how to keep working around them. This was different. The man was covered in rotting flesh around his backside, groin, and thighs. He had apparently been sitting in a recliner for so long that his body had begun breaking down underneath him. The pressure from his own weight had damaged his skin and deeper tissue. Areas that should have been protected had remained wet, dirty, and without enough blood flow for a long time. The skin had not simply become irritated, it had rotted. The damage covered a large area. Flesh had broken down, and infection had taken over. The smell was thick and heavy. It did not stay near the patient. It filled the space around him and followed him everywhere. Flies were already buzzing around his body when he arrived. That was one of the first things that made the situation feel almost unreal. We were inside a medical facility, surrounded by clean equipment, bright lights, and people wearing uniforms. Yet flies were circling the patient as if he had been lying outside near garbage or a dead animal. Then we saw the maggots. There were so many that it was difficult to understand where the damaged skin ended and the infestation began. They covered parts of his groin, thighs, and the wounds near his backside. Some moved across the surface of the tissue. Others were deeper inside the damaged areas. The man was still alive. That fact made the scene harder to process. Maggots are usually connected in people's minds with death and decay. Seeing them move across the body of a living patient created an image that did not fit with anything normal. He had been sitting in the recliner long enough for flies to reach the open wounds, lay eggs, and produce a full infestation. That process does not happen in a few hours. It takes time. The condition of his body told us this was not a sudden emergency. It was the result of long-term neglect, immobility, illness, and probably many problems that had been building for weeks or months. I kept wondering how anyone could reach that point. Had he lived alone? Was someone caring for him? Could he move at all? Did he understand how badly his body was breaking down? Had he asked for help earlier and been ignored? There was no time to ask those questions at first. The immediate problem was getting him cleaned enough to examine and treat. We could not bring him directly into the department in that condition. The infestation was too severe. Flies were everywhere, and the damaged areas were covered in waste, dead tissue, and insects. We had to shower him outside the department while he remained on the stretcher. That was not a normal part of receiving a patient. Hospitals have decontamination procedures for chemical exposure, dangerous substances, and other unusual situations. But this was human decay. The staff gathered hoses, cleaning supplies, protective equipment, and anything else we could use. The man remained lying on the stretcher because he could not stand or move enough to wash himself. We began rinsing him. Water ran across his body and carried away dirt, blood, dead tissue, waste, and insects. Maggots washed from the wounds and collected around the stretcher. Some were still moving as they fell. Flies continued buzzing around us. The water changed color almost immediately. It became brown and cloudy as it passed over the damaged tissue. The smell grew stronger when the water disturbed everything that had been trapped beneath him. We tried to be gentle because he was still a patient, still a human being, and the damaged skin must have been extremely painful. At the same time, we had to remove as much contamination as possible. It was difficult to look at him without thinking about how long he had been suffering. The rotting areas around his lower body suggested that he had remained in his chair for long periods without being cleaned or repositioned. For a person of his size, even small movements would have been difficult. Once the wounds became severe, moving would have caused more pain. That may have trapped him in a cycle. He could not move because he was too large and weak. Because he could not move, the pressure damage became worse. As the wounds grew, moving became even more painful. Then, infection, flies, and maggots took over. By the time emergency services were called, the situation had become almost impossible to manage outside a hospital. We cleaned him as much as we could before bringing him inside. Even after the shower, the smell remained. It had entered the stretcher, the blankets, the air, and probably our own clothes. We wheeled him into the trauma bay. As we moved through the department, the stretcher left a trail behind it. Brown, dirty water dripped onto the floor. It was a mixture of the rinse water, body fluids, dead tissue, and everything else that had washed from him. Staff followed behind, trying to clean and control the mess. Every person nearby noticed. Some looked away. Others stared because they had never seen anything like it. Medical staff are expected to remain professional, but professionalism does not mean people stop being human. The sight and smell affected everyone. We moved him into the trauma bay and began preparing for treatment. His condition was critical. A body does not develop that level of tissue damage without serious infection and other medical problems. His size placed enormous pressure on his heart, lungs, circulation, and organs. The rotting wounds could have allowed bacteria into his bloodstream. He may already have been septic. Sepsis happens when the body reacts severely to infection. Blood pressure can fall, organs can fail, and the patient can die even with aggressive treatment. The medical team had many things to do. We needed blood tests, monitoring, access to veins, wound care, and a full assessment of his condition. Different staff members were assigned different tasks. Lucky me, I was given the job of inserting a Foley catheter. A Foley catheter is a thin tube placed through the urethra and into the bladder. It allows urine to drain into a collection bag. In a critically ill patient, it helps staff monitor urine output, which can give important information about kidney function, hydration, and circulation. It is a common procedure in hospitals. Normally, it is not something that causes much concern. It can be uncomfortable for the patient and requires careful cleaning and sterile technique, but trained staff perform it regularly. This was not a normal situation. The catheter had to be placed through the area most heavily affected by rot, waste, and maggots. I prepared myself as well as I could. I put on 2 masks. I wore a gown. I gathered as much personal protective equipment as I could find: gloves, eye protection, and anything else that might create some distance between me and the patient's body. The masks did almost nothing. The smell came through as if they were not there. It was not simply a bad smell. It felt physical, like something thick entering the nose and throat. It was a mixture of infected tissue, waste, sweat, body fluids, and decay. The closer I moved to his lower body, the stronger it became. I started dry heaving before I had even begun the procedure. I tried to control it. Throwing up inside a mask would have made the situation much worse. I focused on breathing slowly through my mouth, but that only allowed me to taste the smell. There are some smells that seem to have a flavor. This was one of them. I prepared the catheter kit and reminded myself of the steps. Expose the area. Identify the anatomy. Clean carefully. Maintain sterile technique. Insert the catheter. Confirm urine flow. Secure it. Simple steps. I had performed them before, but when I pulled back the blanket covering him, I saw that the shower had not removed everything. There were still maggots everywhere. They moved across his groin and legs. Some were in the folds of skin, others remained inside damaged tissue. His size made it difficult to see and reach the area properly. The weight of his body created deep folds where moisture, infection, and insects had collected. I had to find his penis so I could clean it and insert the catheter. That was much harder than it sounds. On a man of that size, the penis can become buried beneath surrounding tissue. Swelling, fat, infection, and positioning made it difficult to locate. I had to move damaged skin and heavy tissue while trying not to disturb the wounds more than necessary. The patient was alive and aware enough that we still had to think about pain and dignity. It would have been easy to see him only as a terrible medical case, but he was a person lying on a table while strangers cleaned and examined the most private parts of his body. Whatever choices or circumstances had brought him there, he was now helpless. I tried to remain respectful. Then I saw maggots falling from the opening of his penis. I almost vomited inside my mask. It was one of the worst things I had ever seen. They were not only on the surrounding skin, some were coming from the urethral opening itself. Small white larvae moved and dropped from the place where I was supposed to insert the catheter. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My stomach tightened, my throat closed. For a moment, I had to stop and look away. I remember thinking that I could not do it. Then, I remembered that the patient needed the catheter. There was no one else standing there ready to take over. Everyone had their own urgent task. I had to continue. I tried to clean the area as well as possible. Every movement revealed more contamination. The sterile supplies looked almost useless against what was in front of me. A Foley catheter is supposed to be inserted using clean, controlled technique to prevent bacteria from entering the bladder. In this case, bacteria and maggots were already around the opening. I kept thinking, I am going to push maggots up into his bladder. That thought repeated in my head. I knew the catheter was medically necessary. I also knew there was no perfect way to make the area clean. The patient's body was already overwhelmed by infection and decay. Leaving him without the catheter was not a solution. I had to do what I had to do. That is something medical workers tell themselves in terrible situations. You may not like the task. You may feel sick. You may be frightened or disgusted. The patient still needs care. I continued cleaning. I used the supplies to remove as much visible contamination as possible. I tried to clear the urethral opening before inserting anything. The maggots kept moving. Some fell onto the sheet, others remained hidden in the surrounding tissue. I wondered how far they had traveled inside him. Were they only near the surface? Had they entered deeper into the urinary tract? There was no way to know at that moment. I opened the catheter and tried to keep my hands steady. My breathing was shallow because every deeper breath made the smell worse. The masks became hot and damp against my face. I could feel sweat under the gown. The whole procedure felt unreal. A normal Foley insertion takes only a short time. This one seemed endless. I finally placed the catheter. I watched for urine to confirm it had entered the bladder. Even after it was secured, I did not feel relief. I kept thinking about the maggots at the opening and the possibility that some had been pushed deeper. The medical team would have to manage that problem along with everything else. When I stepped away, I felt contaminated even though I had been wearing protective equipment. I removed the outer gloves carefully, then the gown, then the masks. The smell remained in my nose. It seemed to cling to my skin and hair. I washed my hands and face, but it did not disappear. Hospital smells can become trapped in memory. Long after you leave the room, the brain continues producing them. I could still see the larvae moving. I could still feel the dry heaving. I could still hear my own thought about pushing them into the bladder. The patient remained in the trauma bay while the team continued treatment. He had many serious problems. The tissue damage alone could have been fatal. Infection may have spread throughout his body. His weight made every procedure more difficult. Imaging, moving, positioning, breathing support, and circulation all required special planning. A body that large is difficult to treat because normal equipment may not fit. Medication doses, bed limits, and transportation all become more complicated. The staff worked on him for hours. Whatever judgment people may have felt had to be pushed aside. He was critically ill. The goal was to keep him alive. At the same time, it was impossible not to wonder how he had been allowed to reach that state. Someone had eventually called for emergency help, but why not sooner? How long had the smell been present? How long had flies been around him? How many days had the wounds been open? How could anyone live in the same home and not understand that he was dying? Maybe he had refused help. Patients sometimes refuse to go to the hospital because they are embarrassed, afraid, or unable to face what has happened to them. A man weighing around 650 pounds may also know that transportation will be difficult. He may fear being judged by medical staff or becoming a public scene. Perhaps he kept believing the wounds would improve. Maybe the people around him did not understand the seriousness. There may have been mental illness, poverty, lack of care, or family problems. We only saw the final result. His body had become his prison. The recliner had probably been the one place where he felt comfortable enough to sit. Over time, he may have stopped leaving it. Food, drinks, and other needs may have been brought to him. As movement became harder, hygiene became harder too. Skin folds trapped moisture. Pressure cut off circulation. Small sores became large wounds. The smell attracted flies. The flies laid eggs. The eggs became maggots. By the time he arrived at the hospital, The process had gone far beyond anything a normal home could manage. The word rotting can sound dramatic, but that was exactly what was happening. His tissue was dying, while the rest of him remained alive. The body tries to protect itself from infection, but there is a limit. When the damaged area becomes too large and bacteria enter the blood, the organs begin to fail. Later that evening, the patient died. I was not surprised, but hearing the news still affected me. He had arrived in such terrible condition that survival seemed unlikely. Still, medical staff always hold on to some hope while treatment is happening. Once he died, the whole event felt even darker. The outdoor shower. The 12 people needed to move him. The brown water left behind the stretcher. The flies. The maggots. The catheter. All of it had been part of the final hours of his life. I wondered what he understood during that time. Was he fully aware? Did he know he was dying? Did he feel shame when we uncovered and cleaned him? Was he in pain? Or had the nerves and the damaged tissue already died? Did he hear staff trying not to react to the smell and infestation? Those thoughts bothered me because patients in extreme conditions can become dehumanized without anyone intending it. The case becomes a story. The weight becomes the first detail. The maggots become the detail everyone remembers. The person beneath those details can disappear. But he had a life before he became the man on the stretcher. He had once been smaller. He had probably worked, spoken with people, laughed, eaten meals, and made plans. His condition did not happen all at once. It developed slowly until he became almost completely dependent on others. The man who died that evening was more than the condition of his body, even though that was all we saw. Still, I cannot pretend the case did not horrify me. Medical workers see terrible things and continue working because that is the job. But some images break through the professional distance. For me, it was the maggots falling from his penis. I had seen infections. I had seen wounds. I had smelled dead tissue. I had never expected to perform a catheter insertion while larvae were coming from the urethral opening. The thought of pushing them into his bladder stayed with me. I knew logically that the infection was already severe and that the catheter was necessary. In the moment, logic did not make the task easier. My body wanted to move away. My training forced me to stay. I remember being so close to vomiting that I thought the mask would fill. I pictured myself having to leave the room covered in my own vomit while everyone else continued working. I swallowed hard and kept going. That was not bravery. It was duty and stubbornness. Sometimes healthcare is not clean or heroic. It is standing beside a rotting body while insects move across the skin. It is doing a procedure that feels impossible because nobody else can do it at that moment. It is cleaning, lifting, and treating a patient even when every instinct tells you to step away. After the shift, the smell followed me. I showered. I changed clothes. I washed again. It still seemed to remain in my nose. Food was difficult to think about. Certain textures and smells made my stomach turn. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blanket being pulled back, the groin, the damaged tissue, the movement of the maggots, the opening where they fell. Those images did not fade quickly. The trauma bay had to be cleaned thoroughly after the patient died. The stretcher, floor, equipment, and every surface near him required special attention. The brown trail through the department had already been cleaned, but people still remembered where it had been. The staff who showered him outside had their own memories. The 12 people who moved him remembered the weight and the condition of his body. Every person involved carried a different piece of the event. Some talked about it with dark humor. Healthcare workers often do that. Humor can create distance between the person and the horror. It helps people return to work and care for the next patient. Without that distance, the job could become unbearable. But when the shift ended and everyone went home, The joke stopped. The patient was still dead. His final hours had been spent surrounded by strangers wearing masks and protective gowns, trying to clean away months of neglect. I sometimes wondered whether anyone came to claim his body. Did he have family? Were they shocked by his condition? Had they known? Would they understand how he died? Maybe someone loved him but was unable to care for him. Maybe relationships had broken down long before. Perhaps he had pushed everyone away. There were too many unanswered questions. The medical chart could list his weight, infection, wounds, vital signs, treatments, and time of death. It could not fully explain how a living person became covered in decay and insects while sitting in a recliner. That part belonged to the life he had lived outside the hospital. Years later, I still remember the case clearly. I remember the call that a very large patient was coming in. I remember seeing 12 people gather to move him. I remember the flies. I remember the smell before I saw the wounds. I remember the outdoor shower and the brown water flowing from the stretcher. I remember being told I had to insert the Foley catheter. I remember putting on 2 masks and knowing immediately they would not help. I remember pulling back the blanket. I remember trying to find his penis beneath the damaged tissue and body folds. I remember maggots moving across his groin and legs, and I remember some of them falling from the urethral opening. That was the moment I nearly lost control. I thought I would vomit. I thought I would have to step away. Then I thought, I am going to push maggots into this man's bladder. But I have to do what I have to do. So I did it. The catheter went in. The staff continued treatment. The patient died later that evening. There was no dramatic recovery and no final moment where everything turned around. The damage had gone too far. The body that had been failing slowly for so long finally stopped. Hospitals are full of stories about people being saved. They are also full of stories about people who arrived too late. This man had reached us after the infection, pressure wounds, rot, and infestation had taken over most of his lower body. We cleaned him. We treated him. We tried to help. But by the time 12 people lifted him from his old life and placed him on a hospital stretcher, he was already dying. The maggots, the smell, and the terrible condition of his body were not the cause of one bad day. They were the final signs of a long collapse nobody had stopped in time. I worked for a large mutual fund company many years ago. It was the kind of place where thousands of people could work under the same corporate name and still know almost nothing about one another. Different departments occupied different sections of the building, and many employees only recognized the people who sat near them or attended the same meetings. You could pass the same person in a hallway for years without ever knowing their name. Most days were quiet and predictable. People sat in cubicles, answered phones, processed paperwork, checked numbers, and tried to make it through the day without attracting too much attention from management. The office had the usual small dramas. Someone would complain about a supervisor. Someone would get promoted and make other people jealous. Someone would suddenly stop showing up, and a few days later, everyone would learn that they had been fired. When people were fired, the news usually spread quickly. Coworkers whispered near the coffee machine. Someone would say the person had been warned several times. Someone else would claim the manager had never liked them. Then, after a few days, the empty desk would be cleared and another employee would take the space. The company kept moving. There was a woman who worked in another department. I did not know her well. She was not someone I worked with directly, and I did not know much about her personal life before everything happened. I only knew that when she was fired, she was extremely upset. People who saw her around that time said she was distraught. She did not react as if losing the job was only a financial problem. She seemed deeply shaken, angry, and emotionally unstable. Maybe the firing was the final pressure, on top of other problems nobody at work knew about. Most of us only saw the small part of her life that entered the office. A workplace can hide a great deal about a person. Someone can sit at a desk every day, smile politely, and finish their assignments while carrying problems nobody else can see. Coworkers may know what kind of coffee they drink, or how often they arrive late, but they may know nothing about their family, mental state, or what happens when they go home. After she was fired, she left the company. That should have been the end of her connection to us. Most fired employees disappeared from office conversation after a short time. A few people might mention them for a week, but eventually there would be new problems and new gossip. This time, the story became much darker. The woman had a sister who lived in another state. At some point after the firing, she called her sister. I do not know exactly when the call happened or how the conversation began. I only know the part that was repeated afterward. She told her sister that she had dreamed she killed their mother. It was a strange and disturbing thing to say. People have bad dreams all the time. Most people wake up frightened, realize it was not real, and move on. But this was not a normal call where someone casually described a nightmare. Something about it worried the sister. Maybe the woman's tone seemed wrong. Maybe she sounded calm when she should have sounded upset. Maybe there had already been warning signs in the family. The sister lived far away, so she could not simply drive over and check. She tried to contact their mother. There was no answer. At first, that may not have seemed unusual. People miss phone calls. They go shopping, fall asleep, or leave the phone in another room. The sister probably called again and waited. Still nothing. Then she learned that their mother had not shown up for work. That changed everything. Missing one phone call was ordinary. Failing to appear at work without explanation was different, especially if the mother was normally reliable. Combined with the daughter's strange statement about dreaming she had killed her, it was enough to create real fear. The sister contacted the local police and asked them to perform a welfare check. A welfare check usually begins because a family member, neighbor, or employer is worried about someone who has stopped responding. Police go to the address, knock on the door, and try to confirm that the person is safe. Many welfare checks end with a simple explanation. The person may have been ill, sleeping, away from home, or unable to reach the phone. This one did not. The police arrived at the mother's home. I do not know what they noticed first. Maybe the house was quiet. Maybe her car was still there. Perhaps the doors were locked, or there was some other sign that something was wrong. Eventually, they entered and searched the property. In the basement, they found a makeshift altar. There were teddy bears, there were lit candles, and there was the mother's body, covered and encased in salt. The image was so strange that it did not sound real when people first heard it. A basement altar made from teddy bears and candles already seemed disturbing. Those are objects usually connected to comfort, childhood, prayer, or memorials. In that basement, they had been arranged around a dead woman. Then there was the salt. The story we heard at work said she had been encased in about 70 pounds of it. Years later, I learned that an article apparently reported a much larger amount, around 700 pounds. It had been more than 20 years, and memory changes over time. Details become mixed with the way a story was first told. I still remember hearing 70 pounds, but the real amount may have been far greater. Whether it was 70 or 700, the important fact remained the same. Someone had covered the mother's body in an enormous amount of salt. This was not an ordinary murder scene. The body had not simply been hidden. It had been placed in a basement with candles and stuffed animals, and then buried, or packed in salt as part of some kind of ritual arrangement. The police now had more than a missing person case. They had a homicide. The daughter who had called her sister and spoken about the dream became the person they needed to find. A search began. The officers likely tried to learn where she had gone after leaving the house. They checked places she might visit, contacted people who knew her, and searched for her vehicle. Because she had recently been fired, investigators may have contacted the mutual fund company as well. That was probably how the news reached people at work. At first, there may have been only rumors. Someone said a former employee's mother had been found dead. Someone else said the daughter was missing. Then the details began to spread. The basement, the altar, the teddy bears, the candles, the salt. Every new fact made the story sound less believable. People in offices are used to exaggeration. A small argument becomes a major confrontation by the time it reaches another department. Someone says a manager was annoyed, and by lunch, people are claiming the manager screamed and threw something. So when this story traveled through the company, many people assumed parts of it had to be wrong. It sounded like something from a horror film, not something connected to a woman who had recently worked in the same building. But the woman was real. Her mother was dead. The police were looking for her. They eventually found her inside her car. She was dead too. From what we heard, it appeared that she had taken her own life. That ended the search, but created even more questions. If she had killed her mother, why had she called her sister and described it as a dream? Had she been confessing without saying the words directly? Was she confused about what was real? Did she hope her sister would understand and send help? Had the mother already been dead when the call happened? Nobody at work knew the answers. We were not investigators. Most of us had never known the woman beyond seeing her in the office. All we had were fragments of the story, repeated by people who had heard them from someone else. The phrase about the dream was one of the most disturbing parts. She did not say, "I killed Mom." She said she dreamed she had done it. That left open the possibility that she was unable or unwilling to admit what happened directly. Maybe she wanted her sister to discover the truth without making a clear confession. Or perhaps her mental state had deteriorated so badly that she no longer understood the difference between memory and dream. The arrangement in the basement suggested that the murder was not only an act of sudden anger. Someone had taken time to create the altar, gather the teddy bears, light the candles, and bring in large amounts of salt. That required effort. Even 70 pounds of salt would be heavy and difficult to carry. 700 pounds would require many bags and several trips. Where did it come from? Had she purchased it all at once? Did store employees remember her? Was the salt meant to preserve the body, hide the smell, or serve some symbolic purpose? Again, we did not know. Salt has many meanings in different beliefs and traditions. It can represent protection, cleansing, preservation, or a barrier against evil. People sometimes spread it around doors or use it in rituals. Maybe the daughter believed she was protecting herself or her mother. Maybe the salt had no meaning beyond something she had heard or imagined. The teddy bears made the scene stranger. They suggested childhood, comfort, or innocence, but placed around a body, they became unsettling. Perhaps they had belonged to the family. Maybe the mother collected them. Maybe the daughter arranged them because she wanted the basement to feel peaceful. The candles also created the feeling of a ceremony. The scene seemed planned, personal, and disconnected from normal reality. When people in the office learned all this, the mood changed for a while. We looked at the woman's former department differently. Her old co-workers had sat beside her, spoken with her, and watched her leave after being fired. Some may have had arguments with her. Others might have tried to comfort her. Now they were wondering whether there had been signs they missed. Had she said anything strange? Did she seem frightened or unstable? Had she talked about her mother? Did the firing cause something to break inside her, or had the problems begun much earlier? It is easy to search for warnings after a tragedy. A person remembers an odd comment and gives it new meaning. A bad mood becomes evidence. A missed day at work becomes a sign of a hidden crisis. Before the murder, those things may have seemed ordinary. Afterward, everything connected to her felt darker. The company probably tried to keep employees focused on work. Large corporations do not like being connected to stories involving murder and suicide. Management may have told people not to spread rumors or speak to reporters. That did not stop the story from being discussed. People talked quietly in break rooms and over lunch. The details were too strange to ignore. For a while, the number 70 became part of the story. 70 pounds of salt sounded so specific that everyone remembered it. Later, when I saw the claim that it was actually 700 pounds, I questioned my memory. Maybe someone had left out a zero while repeating the story. Maybe the first news reports gave one number and corrected it later. Maybe 20 years of telling the story reduced 700 to 70 in my mind. The exact amount changed nothing about the horror of the scene, but it showed how memory works. You can remember the feeling of a story clearly while individual facts become uncertain. What I remember most clearly is how impossible it all seemed. A woman worked in another department at our mutual fund company. She was fired and became extremely upset. Then she called her sister and said she had dreamed she killed their mother. The mother stopped answering calls and failed to appear at work. Police went to the house and found her dead in the basement beneath a huge amount of salt, surrounded by teddy bears and burning candles. The daughter was found dead in her car. That alone would have been enough to become one of the strangest stories connected to our workplace. But after the first shock faded, my coworkers and I began making jokes. It may sound cruel, and it probably was. Dark humor was how people in the office handled things that made them uncomfortable. The story was too disturbing to discuss seriously every time. Joking created distance from it. When one of us annoyed another person, someone might say, "I heard Walgreens is having a sale on salt, 70 pounds for $5. It became a warning that was not really a warning. Nobody meant they were going to hurt anyone. It was an office joke based on a case everyone knew. The more ridiculous the wording became, the easier it was to laugh. Walgreens did not sell 70-pound murder kits. The joke was built around the absurdity. Still, it came from a real death. A woman had been killed and covered with salt. Her daughter had died too. We took that horror and turned it into something we could say when someone stole a chair, made a mistake, or became irritating. Looking back, I understand why people use dark humor after frightening events. The mind needs a way to make the unbearable feel smaller. If we could laugh about the salt, perhaps the scene in the basement seemed less close to our ordinary office lives. The jokes also made the woman seem like a story instead of someone who had worked in the same company. That was probably easier. The case was already bizarre enough, but then we heard something even stranger. Apparently, the woman's father was in prison for a similar crime. He had killed the mother of his second wife, and he had also encased the body in salt. At first, I did not believe that part at all. It sounded like someone had taken the original story and added the most impossible detail they could imagine. What were the chances that a daughter would kill her mother and cover the body in salt when her own father had committed a similar murder? It seemed too perfect in a terrible way. Then someone found a news article. The article reportedly confirmed that the father had murdered his second wife's mother and used salt around or over the body. That detail changed the entire case. The daughter's use of salt was no longer random. It may have been connected to a crime that already existed in her family history. She may have known exactly what her father had done. Maybe she had heard the story growing up. Perhaps the details had become part of the family's identity. Did she copy him deliberately? Was she repeating something she had been taught? Did she believe the salt had a purpose because her father had used it? There was no way for us to know, but the similarity was impossible to ignore. Family patterns can repeat in many forms. Children may grow up surrounded by violence, fear, or stories that shape the way they think. That does not mean they are destined to become violent themselves, but this case seemed to contain a direct echo from one generation to the next. The father killed the mother of his second wife and covered the body in salt. Years later, his daughter apparently killed her own mother and did the same thing. It was the kind of pattern people would reject in fiction because it seemed too obvious. In real life, it had apparently happened. The correction about the father's victim mattered. For a time, the story was repeated as though he had killed his first wife's mother. But that did not make sense when compared with the family relationships involved. Later, the article clarified that his victim had been the mother of his second wife. That was another example of how details changed as the story traveled. People remembered the salt. They remembered the father was in prison. They forgot exactly whose mother he killed. The story was already so complicated that small family details became mixed. Even now, I try to remain careful when telling it. I was not there. I did not know the family. I learned most of it through coworkers and later through references to a news article. Some details may have been misunderstood. The exact amount of salt may have been 700 pounds rather than 70. The sequence of events may have been slightly different from the way I remember, but the central facts were real enough to leave an impression for more than 20 years. A woman connected to our workplace was fired. Her mother was found dead in a basement under salt. The daughter was found dead in her car. Her father was already imprisoned for a murder involving salt. Those facts stayed with everyone who heard them. The mutual fund company itself remained ordinary. People continued buying and selling investments, answering calls, checking accounts, and attending meetings. The building did not become haunted. Nothing supernatural happened in our office. Yet the case changed the way I thought about the people around me. You could work near someone and know nothing about their family history. You could see them during lunch, pass them in a hallway, or share an elevator without any idea that their father was in prison for murder. You could hear that they had been fired and assume they would simply move on. Then, days later, their name could become part of a police investigation involving a basement altar, a dead mother, and hundreds of pounds of salt. The ordinary appearance of the workplace made the story more unsettling. There was no warning written across the woman's face. She had been one employee among many. The company had likely seen her as a worker number, a salary, a desk, and a performance record. After she was fired, her place in the company ended. But the personal crisis outside the office was only beginning. I sometimes wondered whether the firing played a direct role in what happened. Perhaps losing the job caused her to break down. Maybe it increased stress, removed stability, or made her feel she had nothing left. It is also possible the murder had already happened before she was fired, or that the problems were unrelated. The timeline was never completely clear to me. It would be irresponsible to say the company caused the tragedy. A firing alone does not explain murder. Still, the fact that she was distraught afterward became part of the way we remembered the story. It was the final thing her coworkers saw before everything became public. Her sister's decision to take the strange phone call seriously may have been the reason the mother was found as quickly as she was. The sister did not dismiss the dream as nonsense. She called their mother. She checked with the workplace. Then she contacted police. By the time officers arrived, they could not save the mother. but they discovered the truth. I often thought about the sister after that. In one short period, she learned that her mother was dead and her sister was missing. Then the sister was found dead too. She had made the call that started the investigation, but she also had to live with the meaning of that final conversation. Her sister had told her she dreamed she killed their mother. After the body was found, those words would replay endlessly. Was it a confession? A request for help? A warning? The last strange message from someone already planning to die? There was no answer that could make it easier. The police probably had their own questions about the scene. The amount of salt suggested planning. The lit candles raised the possibility of ritual behavior. The teddy bears might have had personal meaning. Investigators would have examined purchases, phone records, and the daughter's movements. They may have tried to determine exactly when the mother died and when the basement arrangement was created. But because the suspected killer was also dead, there may never have been a full explanation. A trial can reveal evidence, statements, and motive. A suicide often leaves only fragments. The case may have closed legally, but the emotional and psychological questions remained. At work, the story slowly became less frequent. New employees arrived who had never known the woman. The people who worked in her department moved on or left the company. The jokes about Walgreens and salt became less common. Eventually, only a few of us still remembered what the number meant. Time does that. A shocking event becomes an old story. Details fade. The amount of salt changes from 70 to 700. The father's victim becomes confused until someone finds the article. But certain images remain. The basement, the candlelight, the teddy bears, the shape of a body hidden under salt, the car where the daughter was found, the father in prison for doing something frighteningly similar. Even without seeing any of it, those images formed clearly in my mind. That was why the story stayed with me. It did not feel like one tragedy. It felt like violence repeating itself across a family, using the same strange method. The salt connected the two crimes like a signature. Maybe the daughter copied her father. Maybe she believed she was completing some kind of ritual. Maybe the similarity had another explanation. Whatever the truth, the pattern was real enough to be reported. Years later, when I tell the story, I still expect people to think I am making it up. It has all the parts of an exaggerated urban legend. A fired office worker, a dream that was really a confession, a missing mother, a basement altar, teddy bears and candles, a body buried in an enormous amount of salt, a dead daughter in a car, a father imprisoned for a nearly identical murder. It sounds designed to become a horror story, but it was connected to real people. One of them had worked in the same mutual fund company as I did. That was what made it difficult to dismiss. I could not place the story safely in fiction. It had entered our office through a real employee. For a while, we made jokes because the truth was too strange to carry directly. I heard Walgreens is having a sale on salt. 70 pounds for $5. We said it when someone annoyed us and laughed as if the number had no meaning. But everyone who understood the joke knew exactly what it referred to. A woman had died in a basement. Another woman had died in a car. And somewhere behind both of them was a man already in prison for a murder involving salt. More than 20 years later, I still cannot say whether the mother was covered in 70 pounds or 700. I cannot remember every detail of the news reports. I cannot explain what the candles or teddy bears meant. I cannot tell you exactly what was going through the daughter's mind when she called her sister and described the murder as a dream. I only know that the story was real enough to follow us through the office for a long time. It began with a woman being fired from a mutual fund company. It ended with 2 dead women, a basement altar, an impossible amount of salt, and the discovery that the same horror had already happened once before in the same family. My wife and I used to work at a residential group home. It was the kind of place where people needed constant support, structure, patience, and supervision. The work could be rewarding, but it could also be exhausting and unpredictable. Every day was different. Some shifts were calm, while others could turn dangerous without much warning. You had to pay attention all the time, because a quiet situation could become physical in a few seconds. The clients living there had different needs and different levels of understanding. Some struggled to control their emotions. Others could become aggressive when they were frightened, frustrated, or confused. As employees, we were expected to remain calm no matter what happened. We were trained to avoid making situations worse, protect the clients, and keep everyone safe. That sounded simple during training. In real life, it was not. You could care about a client and still be afraid of what they might do during a violent outburst. You could understand that their actions came from their condition and still get hurt. The job required a strange balance. We were supposed to treat everyone with kindness, but we also had to remain ready for dangerous behavior. My wife was pregnant while we were working there. We were excited and nervous, like most people expecting a child. We talked about the future and imagined what our lives would be like after the baby arrived. Even during difficult shifts, the pregnancy gave us something positive to think about. At work, however, it also created extra worry. A residential group home was not the safest place for a pregnant woman. We both understood that. The clients could become unpredictable, and even someone who did not intend to cause serious harm could strike, push, or kick during an outburst. My wife still came to work and did her job. She did not want to be treated as weak or helpless. She was careful, but there was only so much caution could do in an environment where another person could suddenly become violent. One day, a client became aggressive. During the incident, the client kicked my wife in the lower abdomen. It happened quickly. There was no time for her to move away or protect herself properly. The kick landed directly where it could do the most harm. I do not know whether the client understood that she was pregnant. I do not know whether the client meant to hurt the baby or was simply striking out during a moment of anger. In the end, the intention did not change what happened. My wife suffered a miscarriage. The loss destroyed us. People sometimes speak about miscarriage as if it is only a medical event, but it is far more than that for the parents. We had already begun imagining the child's future. We had built hopes around that pregnancy. In our minds, the baby was already part of our family. Then, after one violent moment at work, all of that disappeared. There was grief, but there was also anger. I was angry at the situation. I was angry that my wife had been placed in danger. I was angry that the kind of job we did required us to accept violence as part of the work. Most of all, I hated how quickly life around us continued. The group home still needed employees. The clients still needed care. Schedules were still made. Reports were written. Management discussed the incident in professional language. For us, it was not simply an incident. We had lost a child. My wife had to deal with the physical pain and the emotional weight of knowing that the pregnancy had ended after she was kicked. I watched her suffer, and there was nothing I could do to change what had happened. That feeling of helplessness stayed inside me. We continued working there for a time because life does not always allow people to walk away immediately. Bills still exist after a tragedy. Responsibilities remain. Even when a workplace becomes connected to the worst moment of your life, leaving is not always simple. The director of the facility did not make things easier. He was the kind of person who needed control. In my opinion, he was a narcissist. Everything had to happen his way, and any disagreement became a personal attack against him. He did not handle criticism well. He did not like employees questioning his decisions. He expected people to follow his instructions and accept whatever explanation he gave. If someone disagreed, he often raised his voice or tried to make them feel small. He seemed less interested in solving problems than in proving that he was the most powerful person in the room. My relationship with him had already become difficult before the final argument. I did not trust the way he made decisions. He did not like that I was willing to challenge him. The tension between us grew over time, but I tried to remain professional because we were there for the clients. Among the people living at the home was a 5-year-old child. My wife and I had grown close to this child. Working in a residential setting creates relationships that are difficult to explain to people outside it. You see the clients during their best and worst moments. You help them eat, calm down, learn routines, and feel safe. With a young child, the connection can become especially strong. We began thinking seriously about adoption. We believed we could give the child a real home and a stable family. We were not trying to remove the child for selfish reasons. We cared about the child and wanted to provide a life outside the facility. After the miscarriage, the desire to adopt carried even more emotional weight, though it was not simply an attempt to replace the child we had lost. The 5-year-old was already a real person with their own needs and personality. We wanted to become that child's parents. We spoke with the director and told him we wanted to adopt the child out of the group home. A caring director should have at least listened. He could have explained the proper process, discussed whether adoption was legally possible, or referred us to the right people. Even if there were obstacles, the child's future should have been the most important concern. Instead, the director did not like the idea. The reason, as we understood it, was money. Residential facilities receive funding for the clients in their care. When a client is adopted, transferred, or moved elsewhere, the facility can lose the money connected to that placement. To us, adoption meant giving a 5-year-old a family. To the director, it seemed to mean losing funding. That difference created the final conflict between us. I disagreed with him openly. I believed the child's well-being mattered more than keeping a space filled for financial reasons. If a safe family wanted to adopt a child, the facility should not stand in the way simply because the child represented income. The director did not respond well. The disagreement became heated. He began yelling at me. That was his usual method when he felt challenged. He raised his voice as if volume could replace reason. He wanted to control the conversation and make it clear that he was in charge. I was already angry, but I was trying to hold myself together. I knew arguments with management could cost us our jobs. I also knew that shouting back would not help the adoption process. My wife was there too. She had already suffered more than anyone should have to suffer in that workplace. She had lost the pregnancy after being kicked by a client, and she was still carrying that grief. The director knew what had happened. He knew she had been pregnant. He knew she had miscarried. He knew how painful the subject was. During the argument, he turned his attention from me to her. He looked my wife directly in the eyes. Then he said, "How about next time you get pregnant, don't let it die? Think you could do that? If so, we won't have to have conversations like this." For a moment, I could not believe he had actually said it. Some words are so cruel that the mind rejects them at first. This was not an accidental comment. He looked directly at a woman who had suffered a miscarriage after being assaulted at work and blamed her for the baby's death. He told her not to let it die. The miscarriage was already a source of pain and guilt for her, even though it had not been her fault. Many women blame themselves after a pregnancy loss. They question every action and wonder whether they could have prevented it. The director used that pain as a weapon. He did not say it during a private conversation about grief. He said it during an argument because he wanted to hurt us and regain control. He chose the most painful thing he knew and threw it at her. The room became very quiet in my mind. I could still see him, but the rest of the details seemed to disappear. My attention narrowed to his face and the words he had just spoken. I looked at my wife. I saw the shock and pain in her expression. That was the moment I stopped caring about the job, the argument, or the consequences. Until then, I had been trying to control my anger. After that sentence, I did not. I hit him. I will not pretend it was a carefully considered decision. I did not stand there and think through the legal consequences. I did not calculate what would happen to my job. I reacted. The anger I had carried since the miscarriage came out all at once. I was angry about the kick. I was angry about losing the baby. I was angry about watching my wife suffer. I was angry that this man appeared to care more about funding than the future of a 5-year-old child. Then he looked at my wife and blamed her for the death of our unborn child. I struck him hard enough to break his nose and damage his eye socket. The fight did not last long. It did not need to. Once I hit him, everything changed immediately. People moved between us or pulled me back. Someone called the police. The director was injured and bleeding, and the argument about adoption was over. My wife was probably trying to understand how the situation had gone from words to violence so quickly. I knew I was going to be arrested. Even though the director had said something unbelievably cruel, words did not legally justify breaking his face. The police would see an injured man and hear that I had attacked him. That was exactly what happened. I was arrested and spent the night in jail. It was the first time I had ever been locked up. The experience was strange because part of me understood the seriousness of what I had done, while another part still felt the anger burning inside me. A jail cell gives a person plenty of time to replay events. I thought about the argument. I thought about the child we wanted to adopt. I thought about the director's face before and after I hit him. Mostly I thought about my wife. I wondered how she was doing and whether his words had reopened every part of her grief. I also wondered whether I had made things worse for her. She had already lost the pregnancy. Now her husband was in jail, our jobs were likely gone, and the adoption would probably never happen. Violence creates consequences beyond the person who throws the punch. I knew that. Still, when I replayed the moment, I could not imagine standing there and doing nothing. There are insults people can ignore. There are arguments a person can walk away from. Then there are words chosen specifically to break someone. The director's comment was the cruelest thing I had ever heard someone say directly to my wife. He knew the miscarriage happened after she was kicked by a client while working for his facility. He still blamed her. He spoke as if she had chosen to lose the baby. He acted as if the death was an inconvenience created by her failure. That was why I hit him. I spent the night in jail because of it. He left with a broken nose and eye socket. When people hear the story, some understand my reaction immediately. Others say violence is never the right answer. Legally, they are correct. I assaulted him. I cannot pretend otherwise. There were other options. I could have reported him to higher management. I could have contacted a lawyer. I could have filed a formal complaint. I could have walked away with my wife and exposed what he said later. Those choices would have protected us from legal trouble. They may also have been more effective in the long term. But people do not always behave like calm observers during the worst moments of their lives. I had watched my wife lose a pregnancy after being injured at work. I had been carrying grief, anger, and guilt for a long time. The director found the exact place where all of that pain was stored and attacked it. My reaction was immediate. The director may have believed he could say anything he wanted because he held authority over us. He had probably yelled at employees before and watched them back down. He may have expected me to remain silent because he controlled our employment. He did not expect to be hit. Afterward, I am sure he presented himself as the victim. Physically, he was. He was the one with the broken bones. But the events did not begin with my fist. They began with a workplace that failed to protect my pregnant wife. They continued with the loss of our baby. They continued when the director resisted an adoption because the facility would lose funding. Then he intentionally mocked the miscarriage. None of that erased my responsibility, but it explained the anger behind what I did. Our attempt to adopt the 5-year-old did not end the way we hoped. The conflict with the director made it almost impossible for us to continue working there or remain involved in the same way. I often wondered what happened to the child afterward. I hoped someone else eventually provided a safe and loving home. The hardest part was knowing that the child's future may have been treated like a financial decision. Children in residential care are not numbers. They are not funding sources. They are human beings who need stability, love, and a sense of belonging. The director's reaction suggested that keeping the child in the facility benefited the organization more than allowing the child to leave. That was one reason the argument became so intense even before he mentioned the miscarriage. I believed we were offering the child a family. He seemed to believe we were taking money away from him. Perhaps there were other legal or administrative issues involved. Adoption from a group home is not always simple. Employees cannot necessarily decide to adopt a client without going through a long process. I understood that. What I could not accept was the idea that money should be the reason to oppose it. A professional director could have explained the process respectfully. He could have said there were legal steps, conflicts of interest, or other concerns. Instead, he yelled. Then he attacked my wife with the most painful memory she had. The injury to his face healed eventually. Broken noses and damaged eye sockets are serious, but doctors know how to treat them. Swelling decreases. Bruises fade. The words he said could not be repaired as easily. My wife already carried the memory of the client's kick and the miscarriage. After that day, she also had to remember a man looking directly into her eyes and telling her not to let the next baby die. People often underestimate how much words can hurt because they leave no visible injury. There was no blood on my wife's face. There were no broken bones. But the comment struck a place that was already wounded. I wanted him to feel pain because of the pain he caused her. That was the honest truth. I wanted him to understand that he could not say something like that without consequences. In the moment, breaking his nose felt like the only language he would understand. Looking back, I know that feeling and good judgment are not the same thing. I could have damaged our lives even more. I could have faced a long prison sentence. He could have fallen badly and died. The fight could have involved other employees. Many things could have gone worse. I was fortunate that I spent only one night in jail and that the legal consequences were not greater. He was fortunate that his injuries, while serious, were not fatal. My anger stopped after the damage was done. That is another dangerous thing about violence. The emotional release lasts only a moment. The consequences remain. Still, when people ask whether I regret hitting him, the answer is complicated. I regret what the situation did to my wife. I regret that our attempt to help the child became tangled in conflict. I regret spending the night in jail and creating more stress during an already painful time. I regret that I allowed a man like him to control my actions. But when I remember his exact words, part of me still understands why I did it. He looked at a grieving woman and blamed her for losing her baby. He did it deliberately. He wanted to hurt her. That was the first time I ever spent a night in jail. It was also the first time he ever had a broken nose and eye socket. At the time, I believed it was worth it. Even years later, the anger still returns when I remember the way he looked at her. The group home was supposed to be a place built around care. The employees were expected to show patience, compassion, and understanding toward the clients. The director should have shown those same qualities toward the people working under him. Instead, he used money, authority, and personal pain to control others. My wife had already paid a terrible price for working there. She was kicked in the lower abdomen while pregnant. She miscarried. Then the man in charge treated her loss like a joke he could use during an argument. The whole story began with care. We worked at the home because people needed support. We wanted to adopt a 5-year-old because we believed the child deserved a family. It ended with cruelty, violence, jail, and a broken face. Sometimes I think about how differently the conversation could have gone. The director could have listened. He could have shown sympathy. He could have said the adoption process was complicated, but promised to help us explore it. He could have remembered what my wife had been through and spoken carefully. Instead, he chose the worst possible words. Then, I chose violence. 2 choices turned the meeting into something none of us could take back. I do not tell the story because I think hitting people is a good solution. I tell it because there are moments when years of pain can explode in seconds. People see the punch and think it began with the final insult. It did not. It began when my wife was kicked. It grew when we lost the baby. It continued while we tried to keep working in the same place. It became stronger when the director treated a child's adoption like a financial loss. Then he looked at my wife and told her not to let the next baby die. That sentence was the final push. I hit him before I could think. The police came. I spent the night in jail. He went for medical treatment with a broken nose and eye socket. The facility lost 2 employees. The adoption did not move forward through us. Everyone involved paid a price. The director may have learned that authority did not protect him from every consequence. I learned that anger can take control of a person faster than they expect. My wife learned that someone could use her deepest grief against her simply because he was losing an argument. Of all the things that happened, his words remained the part I hated most. Bones heal, bruises disappear. A night in jail ends when the door opens. But some sentences remain exactly as sharp years later. How about next time you get pregnant? Don't let it die? He said that to a woman who had lost her baby after being kicked while caring for one of his clients. Then he asked whether she thought she could do better next time. I had never hit someone like that before. He had never had his nose and eye socket broken before. That day, both of those things changed. Before the next witness tells their story, take a moment to subscribe to Nachtmeyer Witness. This channel is for the late hours, when sleep is close, but the mind is still awake enough to notice every sound in the room. New true stories arrive here for anyone drawn to strange encounters, uneasy memories, and nights that never felt normal again. Leave a like if the stories have pulled you in so far. Now, let's return to the darkness. Oh man, I have a story about something very similar from a restaurant where I worked. It happened during an evening shift, right in the middle of one of those busy dinner rushes when every part of the restaurant seemed to be moving at once. The dining room was full, the kitchen was loud, and the servers were moving in and out as quickly as they could. Orders kept appearing, food kept leaving the line, and nobody had time to slow down unless something serious happened. Anyone who has worked in a busy restaurant knows how quickly the pressure builds during dinner service. 1 minute, the kitchen is calm and everyone is preparing for the night. A few tables come in, then a few more, and before long, every seat is taken. The printer starts sending out tickets without stopping. Cooks call out orders to one another. Plates cover every open surface. Servers wait near the line, asking how much longer their food will take because guests are becoming impatient. During those moments, even a small delay can affect the entire restaurant. If one station stops working, the other stations begin to fall behind. If food has to be thrown away, the cooks may run out of ingredients. If the line has to be cleaned and restarted, every table waits longer. That pressure can make people take shortcuts they would never consider during a quiet afternoon. The accident started when one of the servers dropped a glass near the kitchen. Normally, a broken glass is not a major event. It is annoying, and it creates extra work, but restaurant workers deal with it all the time. A server might lose their grip while carrying several glasses, or a wet glass may slip from someone's hand. Sometimes a customer knocks one from a table. Most glasses hit the floor, break into a few large pieces, and are cleaned up within minutes. This glass did not break normally. It almost exploded. The moment it struck the hard floor, it seemed to burst in every direction. Large pieces landed close to where it fell, but smaller shards shot much farther than anyone expected. It was almost impressive in the worst possible way. A simple drinking glass somehow turned into a cloud of sharp pieces that spread across the area near the kitchen entrance. People stopped and looked because the sound was so loud. There was the first impact, then the lighter sounds of pieces bouncing and sliding across the floor. Some shards hit the wall or went beneath equipment. Others disappeared under shelves and counters. The smallest pieces were almost impossible to see unless the light hit them from the correct angle. The server who dropped it immediately froze. Everyone nearby understood that the situation had to be handled quickly. Servers and kitchen workers were walking through that area constantly. If the glass remained on the floor, someone could step on it, fall, or track pieces into another part of the restaurant. The danger was even greater because the glass had broken near the kitchen and close to food preparation areas. Restaurants usually have strict procedures for broken glass near food or ice. Those procedures exist because a tiny piece of glass can be almost invisible once it lands in something. It can hide in ice, sauces, vegetables, or prepared food. A customer may not notice it until it is already in their mouth. The correct response is not simply to sweep the visible pieces from the floor. If a glass breaks near open food, all the food that may have been exposed should be thrown away. If it breaks near an ice bin, every piece of ice must be removed. The bin must be cleaned carefully and filled again with fresh ice. Containers should be emptied, counters wiped, and the entire area checked before food service continues. That may seem extreme when nobody sees glass land in the food, but the rule is based on a simple truth. Glass can travel farther than people think. A tiny clear shard can disappear inside a container without anyone noticing it. It can remain hidden until someone bites down. That evening, we began cleaning immediately. Someone warned everyone not to walk through the area. Another employee found a broom and dustpan. People looked beneath counters and near the walls. We collected the larger pieces first and then searched for the smaller ones. The glass had spread everywhere. Every time we thought we had found the last piece, someone noticed another small shard a few feet away. A person had to crouch low and look across the floor because some pieces only became visible when they reflected the kitchen lights. We cleaned as well as we could. The ice was one of the main concerns. Since the glass had broken near it, we followed at least part of the safety procedure. We emptied the ice, cleaned the area, and replaced it. Nobody wanted a piece of glass to disappear inside a drink where a customer could swallow it. The problem was the food. Replacing every container and every prepared item near the accident would have been a huge job. During a quiet part of the day, it would still have taken time. In the middle of a dinner rush, it felt almost impossible. The kitchen line contained many different ingredients. Some were prepared before the shift, others were being cooked or held ready for immediate use. There were sauces, vegetables, potatoes, meat, garnishes, and other items needed for the orders already waiting. If we emptied everything, the line would basically have to stop. The cooks would need to throw away food, clean the containers, bring out new ingredients, and prepare replacements. Some items could not simply be replaced in a few minutes. They would need to be cooked again or taken from storage and heated. Meanwhile, dozens of customers were already waiting. The managers knew what the full procedure required. The staff knew too. If broken glass was anywhere near food, everything in the possible danger area should be cleared out and replaced. But nobody had actually seen glass land in the food. That became the reason for continuing. People looked at the visible spread of the glass and tried to decide how far it had traveled. Most of the pieces seemed to have gone toward the floor and the ice area. Nobody noticed anything land directly in the food containers. We were told it was okay. The visible glass had been removed. The ice had been replaced. The floor had been checked. Since nobody had seen a piece enter the food, the kitchen continued operating. At the time, that decision probably felt practical. The dinner rush was already difficult. Stopping the line would have caused long delays, refunds, and angry customers. Food would have been wasted, and the kitchen staff would have needed to rebuild the entire station while orders continued arriving. People convinced themselves that the risk was small. They had looked carefully. No glass was visible. The food appeared normal. So service continued. The cooks returned to their stations. Servers picked up plates. The noise and movement of the restaurant quickly covered the memory of the broken glass. Orders went out to the dining room. Among those orders was a plate containing mashed potatoes. Mashed potatoes are soft, smooth, and the kind of food people usually eat without thinking. A customer does not expect to find anything sharp inside them. There may be small pieces of potato skin or seasoning, depending on how they are prepared, but nothing that should cause an injury. Somewhere in those mashed potatoes was a piece of the broken glass. Nobody saw it. The shard must have traveled farther than we thought when the glass exploded. It may have flown directly into the container. It could have landed on a utensil, a counter, or another surface before ending up in the potatoes. Because the food was soft and thick, the glass disappeared completely. A clear piece of glass inside white or pale mashed potatoes would be difficult to see. If it was covered with gravy, butter, or seasoning, it would become even less noticeable. A cook placed the mashed potatoes onto a plate. The plate was completed and taken from the kitchen. A server carried it to a table and placed it in front of a guest. The customer began eating. There was no reason for him to be careful with every bite. He believed he was eating normal restaurant food. He took some mashed potatoes into his mouth and bit down. The glass cut his tongue. It did not simply scratch him. The shard was sharp enough to slice his tongue open. A tongue injury bleeds a lot, even when the cut is not very large. The mouth has many blood vessels, and once bleeding begins, it can look frightening. Blood mixes with saliva and spreads quickly. The customer probably felt the sharp pain before he understood what happened. He may have pulled the food from his mouth, expecting to find a hard piece of bone or some other ingredient. Instead, he found a chunk of glass. The server returned to the kitchen and told the manager that a guest had been injured. At first, some people may have thought there had been a mistake. Maybe the customer had bitten his tongue accidentally. Perhaps he had found something hard that was not glass. Then the server explained that there was a sharp piece in the mashed potatoes. Everyone immediately thought about the glass that had broken earlier. The worst-case situation the safety procedure was designed to prevent had happened. That was the exact reason restaurants are supposed to throw away all food near broken glass, even when nobody sees a shard land inside it. We had cleaned the floor. We had emptied and replaced the ice. We had searched for visible pieces, but we had not replaced everything. A single shard had survived the cleanup, hidden inside the food, and reached a customer. The restaurant went from a normal, busy service to a serious emergency. The manager went to the table. Someone brought clean towels or napkins for the customer. Depending on how severe the cut was, they may have recommended medical attention. The customer's tongue was bleeding, and he had every reason to be angry. He had trusted the restaurant to serve him safe food. Instead, he bit into broken glass. The glass could have caused much more damage. It could have cut his gums, cheek, or throat. If he had swallowed it, the sharp edges could have injured him internally. A piece of glass moving through the body can tear tissue and cause bleeding that may not become obvious immediately. The fact that it only sliced his tongue was lucky, even though the injury itself was serious. The restaurant staff were shocked. We all knew the full safety procedure. We knew why it existed. The managers knew too. The decision not to replace all the food had seemed reasonable for a few minutes because the kitchen was busy and no one had seen glass fall near the ingredients. Now that decision looked completely different. It was no longer about saving food or keeping orders moving. A customer had been hurt because the restaurant chose not to stop. The dinner rush suddenly did not matter. The waiting tables did not matter. The cost of throwing away food did not matter. The only thing that mattered was that a guest had a bleeding injury caused by something that should never have reached his plate. I remember the feeling in the kitchen when the news came back. It was a mix of fear, guilt, and disbelief. Nobody had intended to serve glass. The server who dropped it had not meant to create the danger. The people who cleaned had tried to find every piece. The cooks had not seen anything in the food, but intention did not change the result. We had known the rule and had not followed it completely. That was hard to accept. The manager probably began documenting everything. Restaurants usually have incident reports for customer injuries. They would need the customer's information, a description of what happened, and details about the broken glass. The piece itself may have been saved as evidence. The customer might have gone to a hospital or urgent care center. A doctor would need to examine the cut and make sure no smaller pieces remained in his mouth. The restaurant's insurance company would likely be contacted. Higher management or the owners may have been informed immediately. A customer finding glass in food is not a normal complaint. It is a serious safety failure. The kitchen should have been shut down in the affected area. Every open food item near the accident should finally have been thrown away. Containers, utensils, and surfaces needed to be cleaned again. At that point, nobody could continue saying the glass had not reached the food. There was proof. A sharp shard had been inside the mashed potatoes. The same potatoes may have been served to other customers before anyone realized what happened. That thought created another problem. How much of the food had already left the kitchen? Were there more pieces of glass? Could another guest have received one without noticing? The restaurant may have needed to identify every plate prepared from the same container. Servers would have to check tables and possibly remove food that had already been served. There was no way to know whether the piece that cut the customer was the only one. When a glass explodes, it can create dozens or hundreds of fragments. Most may be large enough to see, but some can be extremely small. One visible piece in the mashed potatoes suggested there might have been others nearby. The entire food preparation process became uncertain. The correct procedure was clear from the beginning, but we had tried to avoid it because restarting the line during dinner service felt impossible. Now, we had to do it anyway, only after someone had been injured. That was the worst part. If we had stopped immediately, customers would have waited longer. Some might have complained. The restaurant would have lost food and money, but nobody would have cut their tongue on glass. Instead, we saved time for a short period and created a far larger problem. The server who had dropped the glass probably felt terrible. Even though the decision to keep using the food was not entirely theirs, they may have blamed themselves for the whole incident. If they had not dropped the glass, the customer would not have been injured. But glasses slip. Accidents happen. The real failure came afterward. The staff knew that glass had exploded near food. We knew it could travel. The procedure said to clear everything. The restaurant chose not to do that. That decision was made because people believed they could judge where the glass had landed by looking. The customer's injury proved that we could not. Glass is difficult because it can be almost invisible. Unlike a dark object or a large piece of plastic, a clear shard can hide in many foods. Mashed potatoes were especially good at hiding it. The shard may have been completely covered. A cook scooping the potatoes would not necessarily feel it through a metal spoon. The piece could move from the container to the plate without making any sound. The customer only discovered it because his tongue and teeth found the sharp edge. I imagined the moment many times afterward. He lifts a bite of mashed potatoes. He places it in his mouth. He bites down. There is a sudden sharp pain. Then blood. He pulls the food out and sees a piece of glass. That is the kind of experience a person never forgets. Even after the cut heals, the memory can remain. He may become nervous whenever eating soft food because the glass had been hidden in something that looked completely safe. He may check mashed potatoes carefully for years. He might feel uncomfortable eating at restaurants or trusting food prepared by strangers. The restaurant offered apologies and probably covered some immediate costs, but there are things gift cards or refunds cannot fix. This was not simply a bad meal. The guest had been physically injured. Last I heard, he was planning to sue the restaurant. That made sense. A lawsuit would not only be about the pain in his tongue, it could include medical bills, possible loss of income, emotional distress, and the restaurant's failure to follow safety procedures. If lawyers became involved, they would ask difficult questions. When did the glass break? Where did it break? What was the restaurant's written policy? Who decided not to throw away all the food? Was everyone trained? Why was service allowed to continue? Were managers aware of the risk? The answers would not look good. The restaurant could not honestly say the danger was unknown. The staff understood the rule. We had even discussed replacing everything. The line was not fully cleared because the dinner rush made it inconvenient. That would be difficult to defend. A lawyer could argue that the injury was completely preventable. The restaurant had a safety system designed for this exact situation and chose not to follow it. The guest did not need to prove that anyone wanted to hurt him. He only needed to show that the restaurant knew there was a risk and failed to respond properly. I never heard how the possible lawsuit ended. Maybe the restaurant's insurance company reached a private settlement. Perhaps the customer changed his mind or accepted compensation without going to court. It is also possible the case continued after I stopped hearing updates. Legal matters can take a long time, and employees are not always told what happens. The restaurant may have instructed staff not to discuss it. Whatever the outcome, the incident changed the way many of us treated broken glass. After that night, nobody wanted to hear that replacing food was too difficult. If a glass broke near a preparation area, everything was cleared. It did not matter whether the restaurant was busy. It did not matter how much food would be wasted. It did not matter how long customers would wait. We had seen what happened when the rule was only followed halfway. The ice had been replaced, but the food had not. A customer paid the price. Safety procedures often seem excessive before an accident. People look at the amount of work required and say it is unnecessary. They believe the risk is too small. They trust their eyes and assume they can see every dangerous object. After someone is injured, the same procedure suddenly looks obvious. Of course, everything should have been thrown away. Of course, the line should have stopped. Of course, the risk of serving glass was more important than the rush. The problem is that understanding came too late for the guest whose tongue was cut. The incident also showed how pressure can influence judgment in restaurants. Management wants the kitchen to keep moving. Servers want their tables to receive food. Cooks do not want to rebuild the line. Customers do not want to wait. Everyone has a reason to continue. When the danger is invisible, it becomes easy to pretend it is not there. We had not seen glass in the food, so we acted as if there was none. That assumption was wrong. The broken glass did not care that we were busy. The shard did not become less sharp because the restaurant was full. It remained hidden until a customer found it with his tongue. For a long time afterward, I remembered how strangely the glass had broken. Most glasses fall and crack into a few pieces. This one truly exploded. Shards flew much farther than expected. That should have been the warning. The spread was unusual. We could not clearly see where every piece went. The fact that the glass created such a wide area of debris should have made us more careful, not less. Yet once the visible pieces were cleaned, the urgency faded. The floor looked safe. The food looked normal. The restaurant returned to work. A dangerous object was still waiting inside the mashed potatoes. The server who carried the plate had no idea. The cook who prepared it had no idea. The guest had no idea. That is why food safety cannot depend only on what people can see. Procedures exist because contamination may be hidden. The correct response protects customers from risks employees cannot detect. The restaurant ignored that lesson until a man began bleeding at his table. I also thought about the other guests in the dining room. They may have seen the manager rush to the table or noticed the injured man holding a napkin to his mouth. Some might have heard that glass had been found in food. A restaurant can lose trust very quickly. Once one customer sees something like that, everyone begins looking at their own plates differently. People may stop eating. They may ask whether their food came from the same area. They may leave without finishing their meal. Even customers who were never in danger can become frightened because they no longer trust the kitchen. The staff had to continue serving while knowing that trust had been damaged. The atmosphere changed. The usual kitchen stress was replaced by something heavier. People worked more slowly, checking food and surfaces repeatedly. Nobody wanted another shard to appear. The manager's face probably showed the seriousness of the situation. What had started as a broken glass had become a possible lawsuit and a serious customer injury. All of it happened because the full cleanup seemed too difficult during the rush. The lesson was simple, but it was learned in the worst way. If glass breaks near food, everything has to go. Not only the pieces you can see, not only the ice, not only the containers closest to the impact. Everything in the possible area must be replaced. The cost of food and time is nothing compared with the cost of someone swallowing or biting glass. The guest was lucky the shard cut his tongue instead of going farther down his throat. The restaurant was lucky he did not suffer a more serious injury. We were lucky no second customer found another piece. But luck should never have been part of the safety plan. Years later, I could still remember the sound of that glass hitting the floor and breaking with far more force than expected. I remembered the pieces scattered across the area. I remembered everyone searching and cleaning. I remembered the discussion about replacing the food. I remembered how impossible it seemed to restart the whole line in the middle of dinner service. Then, I remembered the server returning with the news. A guest had bitten into mashed potatoes. There was glass inside. His tongue was sliced open. The exact worst-case situation we were trying to avoid had happened. The rule existed for a reason. That night, we learned what the reason looked like. This happened around 10 years ago at a restaurant where I worked. We had a cook who had been there for a very long time, close to 10 years by that point. Everyone knew him, and everyone also knew that he smoked weed regularly. It was not exactly a secret. The managers knew, the other cooks knew, and the people working the front of the restaurant knew too. Normally, using drugs would have been enough to get someone fired, especially in a job where they handled knives, hot oil, grills, and food that was being served to customers. But he was not dealing directly with guests. He worked extremely hard, and he was one of the best cooks we had. Because of that, the bosses mostly looked the other way. He was the kind of worker who could handle a busy kitchen without falling apart. When the restaurant filled up and order tickets started coming in faster than the cooks could read them, he usually stayed focused. He knew the menu, understood the timing of every dish, and could keep several things going at once. He knew how long the food needed, how to organize the station, and how to help the newer cooks when they became overwhelmed. He might arrive smelling like weed, and sometimes it was clear he had smoked before work, but he still did the job. That was probably why management never stopped him. From their point of view, he showed up, worked hard, did not cause trouble with customers, and produced good food. In restaurant work, dependable cooks can be difficult to find. Many people quit without notice, arrive late, or cannot handle the pressure of a busy evening. A cook who had stayed for around 10 years and knew the kitchen better than almost anyone was valuable. For most of that time, his weed smoking did not seem to cause serious problems at work. He may have been slower sometimes, or he may have acted relaxed when everyone else was stressed, but he was still able to function. The bosses probably convinced themselves that whatever he did outside work was his own business, as long as the food was good and he continued showing up. Then he began smoking synthetic marijuana. That was when his behavior changed. Synthetic marijuana was not the same as normal weed. People sometimes called it spice or used other names for it, but nobody really knew exactly what chemicals were in it. It could affect people in unpredictable ways. Someone might seem calm one time and completely detached from reality the next. It could cause confusion, paranoia, strange movements, memory problems, or behavior that made no sense. After the cook started using it, the difference became obvious. He had always been unusual in some ways, but now his actions became difficult to understand. He would appear confused during simple tasks. Sometimes he stared at things as if he had forgotten what they were. He might begin doing one job, stop in the middle, and move to something else without finishing. His mood could change quickly. One moment he seemed normal, and the next he acted as if his thoughts were somewhere far away from the kitchen. The people who had worked with him for years noticed it first. We knew what he was normally like, and this was not normal. His old habits had never stopped him from being a good cook. The synthetic marijuana was different. It seemed to take away his judgment. The managers noticed too, but they still did not take serious action. Maybe they thought he would stop. Maybe they did not understand what he was using or how dangerous it could be. It is also possible they were simply afraid of losing an experienced cook. As long as he continued working and the restaurant kept running, they were willing to ignore the warning signs. That decision eventually created a dangerous situation. One night during a shift, the cook realized he had forgotten to take out a case of chicken wings so they could thaw overnight. The wings were frozen together in one large, hard block. In restaurants, frozen food often has to be moved from a freezer to a refrigerator well before it is needed. It must thaw at a safe temperature rather than being left out in the open. If someone forgets to move it, the next shift can be left without enough food ready to cook. The cook had made that mistake. He had forgotten to leave the case out to thaw properly. Instead of telling a manager or finding a safe way to deal with the problem, he tried to fix it immediately. He took a butcher knife and started hitting or cutting at the frozen chicken wings. A butcher knife is made for cutting meat, but it is not meant to be used like a hammer or an ice tool. The blade may be strong, but frozen food can be as hard as a solid block. Striking it with force can damage the knife, send the blade in the wrong direction, or cause pieces of metal to break away. The cook should have known that. He had worked in kitchens for years. He understood knives and food preparation, but his judgment was no longer reliable. He began using the butcher knife to separate the frozen wings. The case must have been difficult to break apart. The wings were stuck together, and the knife probably bounced or slid whenever he struck the frozen block. Each hit placed more pressure on the blade. At some point, the tip of the butcher knife snapped off. It broke inside a chunk of frozen chicken. That should have stopped everything. The moment a piece of a knife breaks near food, all the food around it must be treated as dangerous. The missing piece has to be found before anything is cooked or served. A sharp metal tip can cut a person's mouth, throat, or stomach. It can cause internal injuries that require emergency surgery. The cook knew the knife had broken. He could see that the tip was missing. He also knew it had broken while he was striking the chicken. Yet he did not stop. That was one of the most unbelievable parts of the story. He was not unaware that the metal had broken. He had the damaged knife in his hand. The missing section was clearly somewhere in or around the frozen wings. A person thinking normally would have thrown away the entire affected section of chicken, searched carefully for the knife tip, and reported the incident to a manager. He continued working. The missing blade tip did not discourage him. He kept separating the frozen wings, even though a sharp piece of metal was hidden somewhere among them. Maybe he believed he would notice it later. Perhaps he thought it had fallen onto the floor or remained stuck in the ice where he could eventually see it. It is also possible that, under the effects of the synthetic marijuana, he simply stopped caring about the danger. Whatever he was thinking, he eventually managed to separate the chicken. Then, he cooked it. The wings were placed into the cooking equipment, probably a fryer. The heat melted the remaining ice, cooked the chicken, and changed the appearance of everything. If the knife tip had been stuck inside or against one of the wings, it would have remained hidden. Once the wings were cooked, they looked like any other order. They may have been tossed in sauce, placed in a container, and prepared for takeout. The cook sent an order out of the kitchen. Nobody else knew there was a piece of broken knife somewhere in the chicken. The front staff handed the order to a family. The family took the food away, probably expecting a normal meal. They had no reason to think anything was wrong. They had ordered chicken wings from a restaurant, and the food looked properly cooked. At some point, one of the children began eating. The child bit into one of the wings and found something hard and sharp. It was the missing tip of the butcher knife. Thankfully, the child was not injured. That was pure luck. The knife tip could have cut the child's lips, tongue, gums, or throat. If it had been swallowed, it could have damaged the child internally. A sharp piece of metal moving through the body can tear tissue and cause bleeding that may not be immediately visible. The child could have needed emergency surgery. The outcome could have been much worse than a complaint to the restaurant. A short time after the order went out, I received a phone call from the family. They explained that their child had bitten into a chicken wing and found a knife tip inside. At first, it was difficult to believe. Customers sometimes find bones, packaging, or other objects in food and assume the worst. But this family had an actual piece of broken blade. The description immediately connected to what had happened in the kitchen. The cook had broken the tip from the butcher knife while trying to separate the frozen wings. He had never found it. Now it had appeared in a child's food. The family was understandably upset, but they were also relieved that the child had not been hurt. Somehow, they were satisfied with receiving some gift cards from the restaurant. That response was surprisingly calm, considering what could have happened. The restaurant gave them gift cards, apologized, and treated the situation like a serious customer complaint. The family accepted the offer and did not push the issue further. At least as far as I knew. They could have contacted a lawyer. They could have reported the restaurant to health authorities. They could have spoken publicly about the incident or caused the restaurant to face a major investigation. Instead, because the child was safe, they accepted the compensation. The restaurant was incredibly lucky. The cook was even luckier. He had made several terrible decisions in a row. First, he forgot to thaw the chicken. Then he tried to break frozen wings apart with a butcher knife. When the blade tip snapped off, he failed to stop and find it. He cooked the chicken anyway and allowed it to be sent to a customer. Each step made the situation more dangerous. Any one of those decisions should have been enough for management to remove him from the kitchen. The broken knife alone should have caused the food to be thrown away. Serving the wings after losing the metal tip should have led to immediate termination. The fact that the blade ended up in a child's mouth should have made the decision obvious. He still was not fired. That was almost as strange as the original incident. Management had protected him for years because he was hardworking and talented. They had already ignored his weed use and the changes caused by synthetic marijuana. Even after his poor judgment nearly caused a serious injury to a child, they allowed him to keep his job. Maybe they believed it was a one-time mistake. Maybe they blamed the situation on the frozen wings rather than his drug use. Perhaps they were afraid they would not be able to replace him. Whatever their reason, he remained employed. The rest of us had to continue working with him, knowing what had happened. It would have been difficult to trust any food he prepared after that. A cook's job depends on judgment, cleanliness, and attention. Customers cannot see what happens in the kitchen, so they rely on the workers to protect them. This cook had knowingly lost a knife tip in food and served it anyway. That was not a small error. It was not like forgetting a topping or overcooking an order. He had allowed a sharp piece of metal to leave the restaurant inside food. The fact that nobody was hurt did not make the choice less dangerous. The people in the kitchen probably talked about it for days. Some may have laughed nervously because the result was so unbelievable. Others were angry that management had not fired him. Restaurant workers often use dark humor to deal with dangerous or disgusting situations. Jokes can make a frightening event easier to discuss. But behind the jokes, everyone understood that a child could have been badly injured. The knife tip was strong enough to survive the cooking process. It remained sharp enough for the family to identify it. The child had placed it in their mouth and bitten down. A slightly different angle could have caused a deep cut. If the child had swallowed without chewing carefully, the family might not have known the metal was there until the child became sick or started bleeding. Management should have treated the incident as a final warning that the cook was no longer safe to have in the kitchen. They did not. A few days later, he did not come to work. He simply failed to show up for his shift. That was when they finally fired him. The reason he lost his job was not the broken knife tip, the unsafe food, or the danger to the child. It was attendance. That outcome made the whole situation feel ridiculous. A cook could use synthetic marijuana until his behavior became bizarre. He could attack frozen chicken with a butcher knife. He could snap the blade inside the food. He could continue cooking without finding the missing metal. He could send it out to a family. A child could bite into the knife tip. None of that got him fired. Missing work did. It showed how strange management priorities could be in restaurants. They were willing to ignore dangerous behavior as long as the employee came in and kept the kitchen moving. The moment he stopped being useful to them, they ended his employment. His years of hard work had protected him from consequences for a long time. He had built a reputation as a great cook who could be relied on during difficult shifts. That reputation made the bosses excuse things they should never have excused. At first, looking the other way may have seemed harmless. He smoked weed, but he did his job. He worked hard and stayed away from customers. Nobody wanted to create a problem when the kitchen was functioning well. Over time, that tolerance became a pattern. When he switched to synthetic marijuana and began acting strangely, management was already used to ignoring his drug use. They may have thought the new behavior would pass, or that he could still work through it. The chicken wing incident proved otherwise. He had lost the basic judgment needed to work safely. A professional cook should never continue using food after a knife breaks inside it. Even a new kitchen worker should understand that. His years of experience made the choice worse, not better. He knew the danger. His mind simply was not operating normally. The story also showed why an employee's performance cannot be judged only by how fast they work. A person may work hard and produce good food most of the time, but one dangerous decision can harm a customer and destroy a business. Reliability means more than arriving for a shift. It means being mentally present. It means following food safety rules. It means understanding when an entire product must be thrown away, even if that creates waste. The cook had stopped being reliable before he stopped showing up. Management failed to recognize it. The family's calm response may have saved the restaurant from much larger consequences. They accepted gift cards because their child was not hurt, but another family might have reacted very differently. Even without an injury, finding a knife blade in a child's food could cause serious legal trouble. The family could have demanded medical testing, compensation, or an inspection of the restaurant. Health officials might have questioned the kitchen's safety practices and management. They could have asked why the cook was allowed to continue working while using drugs that affected his behavior. They might have reviewed training, incident reports, and food handling rules. If the child had been injured, the restaurant could have faced a lawsuit large enough to close it. The cook might also have faced legal consequences. All of that was avoided because the child happened to bite carefully enough to notice the knife tip without being cut. That luck did not change how dangerous the food had been. After the call, I imagined the family opening the takeout containers at home. The child probably picked up a wing without any concern. Maybe the family was talking, watching television, or eating together at a table. There was no warning that something dangerous had left our kitchen. The knife tip was hidden beneath cooked skin, sauce, or meat. The child bit down and felt metal. There may have been confusion at first. They may have thought it was bone, foil, or a piece of cooking equipment. Then, they saw the sharp broken end and realized it came from a knife. The parents must have checked the child's mouth immediately. They likely looked for blood and asked whether the child had swallowed anything. Once they knew there was no injury, anger probably replaced fear. Someone called the restaurant. I had to listen while they explained that a knife tip had been found in food we served. It was difficult to respond professionally because there was no reasonable explanation that made the situation acceptable. We could apologize. We could offer compensation. We could promise to investigate. But the truth was simple. The kitchen had sent a broken blade to a child. I also wondered what the cook thought when he found out. Maybe he finally understood where the missing knife tip had gone. Perhaps he was embarrassed or frightened. He may have felt relieved that the child was unharmed. It is also possible that the synthetic marijuana had affected him so badly that he did not react normally at all. His behavior had already become bizarre. He might have treated the incident like an unfortunate mistake rather than something that could have killed or injured someone. That would have made the rest of the staff even more uncomfortable. A person who understands the seriousness of an error may become more careful afterward. Someone who does not fully understand the danger may repeat it. Management allowed him to return anyway. For the next few shifts, every knife and every order he handled would have made people nervous. Cooks share space and tools. They have to trust one another. If one person drops something, breaks equipment, or contaminates food, the others need to know immediately. This cook had already shown that he might hide or ignore a serious problem. The fact that he was finally fired for missing work instead of endangering a child became one of the strangest parts of the story whenever we told it later. People often expected the story to end with the manager firing him on the spot. That would have made sense. Instead, he survived the knife incident professionally. Then, a few days later, he did not arrive for his shift. Restaurants can forgive many things when they need a worker, but they cannot use someone who is not physically there. The bosses who had ignored drug use and dangerous behavior suddenly had a clear rule they were willing to enforce. No call, no show. He was fired. It was almost as though attendance mattered more than customer safety. Perhaps management finally used the absence as an easier reason to get rid of him. By then, they may have realized he had become a risk, but did not want to openly admit how long they had allowed the situation to continue. Firing him for failing to appear avoided a deeper conversation about their own responsibility. They did not have to explain why they kept him after the chicken wing incident. They could simply say he did not come to work. Either way, he was gone. The kitchen had to adjust without a cook who had been there for around 10 years. Even after everything that happened, losing someone with that much experience probably created problems. Other workers had to take over his station, work extra hours, or train someone new. But the restaurant was safer without him. A great cook who cannot think clearly is no longer a great cook. Skill does not matter if the person is willing to serve food containing broken metal. The incident stayed with me because it began with such an ordinary mistake. He forgot to thaw chicken wings. That happens in restaurants. People forget prep work. They miscount supplies or leave food in the wrong freezer. Usually, the problem is solved by changing the menu, using another product, or explaining that an item is unavailable. The cook turned a simple supply problem into a dangerous emergency because he refused to slow down. He tried to force frozen food apart. The knife broke. He ignored the missing tip. The wings were cooked and served. A child found the blade. At every stage, someone could have stopped the chain. The cook could have reported the frozen case. He could have thrown away the chicken after the knife broke. Another worker could have noticed the damaged knife. Management could have inspected the food. The order could have been held. None of that happened. The restaurant relied on luck, and for once, luck protected the customer. Years later, the part I still found hardest to understand was that the broken knife did not deter him. He was holding a butcher knife with the tip missing. He knew he had been hitting a block of frozen chicken. There was only one likely place the piece could have gone. Still, he continued. That was the clearest sign that the drugs had changed his thinking. The man who had once been one of the best cooks in the restaurant had become someone who could not recognize an obvious danger. His old reputation kept him employed longer than it should have. The bosses remembered the hard-working man he had been and ignored the person he was becoming. By the time the knife tip appeared in a child's food, the warning signs had already been present for a while. Nobody wanted to act until they were forced to. Even then, they waited. The cook's final absence gave them the excuse they needed. He was fired not because a child could have been seriously injured, but because he failed to show up for work. That was how his 10 years at the restaurant ended. Not with the dangerous drug use, not with the frozen wings, not with the butcher knife snapping, not with the missing piece of metal, not even with the call from a frightened family whose child had bitten into it. He kept his job through all of that. Then he missed a shift, and the bosses finally let him go. I work in a restaurant, and most nights follow the same familiar pattern. The dining room fills slowly, the kitchen grows louder, and everyone settles into their place. Servers move between tables, cooks stand over hot grills, and the people working at the salad station prepare plate after plate as quickly as they can. During a busy evening, nobody has much time to stop and think. Each person focuses on the next order, then the next one after that. The goal is to keep the food moving and avoid falling behind. The salad station may look like one of the safer parts of a restaurant kitchen, especially compared with the hot grills, fryers, and ovens. There are no open flames, and the food is usually cold. Still, it has its own dangers. The workers use sharp knives constantly. They cut lettuce, tomatoes, onions, cucumbers, chicken, cheese, and anything else needed for the different salads on the menu. When the restaurant is busy, those knives move quickly. A person can cut hundreds of vegetables during a single shift. After doing the same movements for hours, the work can become almost automatic. The hand holding the knife moves up and down while the other hand guides the food. An experienced worker can do it without looking carefully at every cut. That speed helps during a rush, but it also means one small mistake can cause a serious injury. One evening, one of the workers at the salad station was preparing an order. I do not remember exactly which salad he was making or what ingredient he was cutting at the time. It could have been lettuce, vegetables, or something else. What mattered was that he was using a sharp kitchen knife and working quickly. The dining room was busy enough that orders kept coming through. Tickets were lined up at the stations, and everyone was trying to prepare food without slowing down the kitchen. The salad worker was doing what he had probably done hundreds of times before. Then the knife slipped. He cut off the tip of his finger. It was not a small cut that could be cleaned and covered with a bandage. The injury was serious enough that he needed to go to the hospital. The end of his finger had been completely separated. At first, the people near him may not have understood what happened. Kitchen workers get small cuts often. Someone might pull their hand back, curse, and reach for a towel. Most cuts can be handled quickly without stopping the entire kitchen. This one was different. There was blood immediately. The salad worker knew as soon as he looked at his hand that the injury was bad. The tip of his finger was missing, and the bleeding could not be ignored. The people around him stopped what they were doing. Someone brought clean towels or bandages. Another person told a manager. The worker needed to get away from the food area, both because he was injured and because blood had been spilled near ingredients that were supposed to be served to customers. The correct response should have been to stop everything at the station. Any food nearby should have been thrown away. The cutting boards, knives, counters, and containers should have been checked and cleaned. Nobody should have served anything prepared during the accident until the missing piece of the finger had been found. That is what should have happened. In a busy kitchen, however, confusion can spread quickly. The salad worker was in pain and worried about his hand. The manager and other employees were trying to control the bleeding and decide how to get him to the hospital. Orders were still coming in. Servers were still waiting for plates. The rest of the kitchen may not have understood exactly where the accident happened or which order the worker had been preparing. Somewhere during those few confused minutes, the salad he had been making left the kitchen. It should never have gone out. Maybe the plate had already been almost finished when the accident happened. Another employee may have seen it sitting at the station and assumed it was ready. Perhaps a server picked it up from the window without knowing someone had been injured while preparing it. In a restaurant, completed plates are supposed to move quickly. If food sits too long, customers complain and managers ask why it was delayed. The salad looked normal. There may have been lettuce, vegetables, dressing, cheese, and whatever other ingredients the customer had ordered. Nothing about its appearance warned the server that something was wrong. The plate was carried through the dining room and placed on a table. The guest began eating. Back in the kitchen, the injured worker was preparing to leave for the hospital. He was likely holding pressure on his finger while someone wrapped the wound. Depending on the restaurant, another employee, a manager, or emergency medical workers may have helped him. Before he left, he looked for the missing fingertip. He could not find it. At first, that may not have seemed unusual. A small piece of flesh could have fallen onto the floor, become caught in a towel, or landed beneath the cutting board. The salad station was filled with ingredients and equipment. The missing piece could have been difficult to see. People probably searched quickly around the area. They checked the cutting board. They looked near the knife. They looked on the floor. They may have moved containers or searched through discarded food. The fingertip was not there. The injured worker still needed medical care, so he could not remain in the kitchen searching forever. He left for the hospital without knowing where the missing part of his finger had gone. That should have caused the restaurant to stop serving food from the entire station immediately. By then, unfortunately, one salad had already reached a customer. Shortly afterward, a guest called over a server and complained that there was something chewy in the salad. The guest thought it was a piece of bacon. That was not necessarily unusual. Restaurants sometimes make mistakes with toppings. A piece of food can fall into the wrong container, or an employee may add an ingredient that the customer did not request. The guest did not want bacon in the salad, so they complained. From the customer's point of view, it was probably a simple mistake. They had found a small piece of something in the food. It was chewy, and they believed it was meat. Maybe they did not eat pork. Maybe they were vegetarian. Maybe they simply had not ordered bacon and did not want it mixed into their meal. They probably expected the server to apologize and replace the salad. The server may have looked at the object and agreed that it seemed like bacon. Under the lighting in a restaurant dining room, a small piece of cooked meat and a piece of human tissue might not look as different as anyone would want to believe. It was mixed with dressing and other ingredients. The customer had already chewed it. The complaint was taken back toward the kitchen. At almost the same time, people were trying to understand where the salad worker's fingertip had gone. The connection would not have been immediate for everyone. Someone may have said that a guest found something strange in a salad. Another person may have remembered that the injured worker had been preparing a salad when he cut himself. Then, someone realized that the missing fingertip still had not been found. The salad the customer was eating may have been the same one the injured worker had been making. The chewy piece the guest thought was bacon may not have been bacon. It may have been the missing tip of the worker's finger. That realization would have changed the entire situation. A kitchen accident was already serious. A worker had lost part of his finger and gone to the hospital. But now a customer may have placed that missing body part in their mouth and chewed it. There was no easy way to explain that. The restaurant needed to act immediately. The manager had to speak with the guest, stop food service from the salad station, and make sure all nearby ingredients were removed. The kitchen needed a full cleaning, not only because of the injury, but because human blood or tissue could have contaminated other food. The guest may have still been sitting at the table with the salad in front of them. They likely expected a replacement meal or an apology for unwanted bacon. Instead, the manager had to consider the possibility that the object was part of an employee's finger. I cannot imagine what it would feel like to receive that information. One moment, the guest believed they had found bacon. The next, they may have learned they had bitten into human flesh. The thought alone would be enough to make most people sick. The guest may have spit the piece out onto a plate or napkin before complaining. If so, the restaurant could recover it and confirm what it was. If the customer had swallowed it, there would be no way to retrieve it. Even if the piece remained on the plate, the guest had already chewed it. They could probably still feel the texture in their mouth. Learning the truth would make that sensation impossible to forget. The object had seemed chewy because it was not bacon at all. It was skin and tissue from a human finger. The restaurant may have needed to contact health officials, insurance representatives, and possibly lawyers. Serious food contamination is not handled like an ordinary customer complaint. There would be reports, statements, and questions. How did the salad leave the kitchen after the accident? Who picked it up? Did anyone know the worker had been injured? Was the station shut down? Why was the missing fingertip not found before food continued to be served? Had any other plates been prepared nearby? Were there traces of blood on other ingredients? Each question would reveal another failure in the response. The original cut may have been an accident. Kitchen workers use knives, and accidents happen even when people try to be careful. Allowing the salad to reach a customer was a different matter. Once someone had lost part of a finger near food, every plate from that area should have been treated as contaminated. The rush, the waiting customers, and the pressure to keep orders moving should no longer have mattered. But restaurants are built around speed. During a busy service, food continues moving unless someone clearly stops it. If communication fails for even a few minutes, a plate can leave the kitchen before everyone understands what happened. That appears to be what happened that evening. The salad worker was focused on his injury. The manager was focused on getting him medical help. The server was focused on delivering the food. The customer was focused on eating dinner. Nobody understood that part of the worker's finger may have traveled from the cutting board to the salad bowl, then from the kitchen to the table. The injured employee probably learned about it later. At the hospital, doctors may have asked whether the missing fingertip had been recovered. In some cases, surgeons can reattach a cleanly cut piece if it is preserved properly and brought in quickly. The worker could only say that he had not found it. Perhaps someone from the restaurant called and told him that a possible piece had been discovered in a customer's food. I do not know how that conversation would have gone. He was already dealing with pain, shock, and the possibility that his finger would never look or work the same way again. Then, he had to learn that a customer may have chewed the missing part. That would add shame and horror to an already terrible accident, even though he had not intentionally allowed the plate to leave the kitchen. He may have blamed himself. He might have thought he should have stopped the order or searched longer. But after suffering an injury like that, a person may not be able to think clearly. His main responsibility at that moment was getting medical care. The larger failure belonged to the system around him. Someone should have stopped service. Someone should have removed every plate and ingredient from the station. Someone should have made sure the missing fingertip was found or accounted for before any food left the kitchen. The fact that the customer initially thought it was bacon made the story even more disturbing. Bacon has a chewy texture, especially if it is undercooked or mixed into a cold salad. The guest had no reason to imagine anything worse. They did not see a fingernail or a recognizable shape. If they had, they would probably have realized immediately that the object was not food. The piece may have been small and damaged by the knife. Dressing and salad ingredients could have hidden its true appearance. The guest's teeth may have changed its shape further. By the time they complained, it may have looked like nothing more than a strange piece of meat. The customer might have continued eating for several bites before noticing it. They may have moved the piece around in their mouth, trying to understand what it was. The memory of that texture would probably remain for years. Even after learning the truth, the guest might have felt that they could still taste it. They may have brushed their teeth repeatedly or become sick when thinking about salad. Certain foods might remind them of the event. Bacon, chicken, or any chewy ingredient could bring the memory back. Eating at restaurants might become difficult because they had trusted a kitchen once and unknowingly received part of a human body in their meal. The employees were affected too. The server who carried the plate might feel guilty, even if they had not known what happened. They had delivered the salad directly to the customer. The person who finished or released the plate might wonder why they had not checked more carefully. The employees who cleaned the station may have searched through trash, ingredients, and equipment, hoping to find the missing piece somewhere else. Finding nothing would make the likely explanation harder to deny. The manager had to control the situation while probably feeling horrified. Restaurant managers deal with angry guests, late orders, missing items, and staff problems. Very few are prepared to explain that a customer may have chewed part of an employee's finger. There was no normal apology for something like that. Offering a replacement salad would be insulting. Removing the meal from the bill would not begin to address it. The restaurant may have offered medical testing or compensation. The guest could worry about exposure to blood-borne diseases, even if the actual medical risk was limited. Both the customer and the worker may have needed testing. The health department would likely want to know exactly how the food became contaminated and what steps the restaurant took afterward. The kitchen should have been closed, or at least the affected area shut down until it was properly cleaned and inspected. Every knife, cutting board, container, and surface near the accident needed to be disinfected. Any open ingredients had to be thrown away. That could mean losing a large amount of food, but once blood entered the station, nothing nearby could be trusted. The chair, floor, counters, and utensils would all need careful cleaning. The rest of the evening service may have ended early. Customers could have been asked to leave, or the restaurant may have stopped taking new orders. Rumors would spread quickly among the staff. Even employees who had not been working would hear about the accident. At first, the story might sound impossible. A cook cut off the tip of his finger. The finger disappeared. A salad reached a customer. The customer complained about chewy bacon. The salad worker could not find the missing fingertip. It sounded like the kind of dark restaurant story people tell to shock new employees. But for the people who were there, it was real. After the incident, knife safety probably became a major topic. Workers would be reminded to slow down, use proper cutting methods, and wear protective gloves if required. The more important lesson, however, was about what happens after an injury. A food area cannot continue operating normally when blood or body tissue may be present. The entire process must stop. Every item must be traced. Any finished plate must be held. Employees need to communicate clearly, no matter how busy the restaurant is. The rush cannot be allowed to continue around an emergency. That evening showed what happens when one plate slips through. The salad worker's injury was serious enough that he needed hospital care, but the missing fingertip created a second emergency. If the piece had fallen onto the floor, it would have been terrible but contained. If it had landed in a trash bin, someone might have recovered it. Instead, it likely landed in the salad. The worker may not have felt it happen. The knife cut so quickly that the fingertip could have fallen among lettuce, cheese, or toppings without anyone seeing it. A small piece of flesh would be easy to lose in a full salad bowl. The colors and dressing could hide it. Another employee might toss the ingredients, plate the salad, and send it out. The customer would not know until the piece was already in their mouth. The path from the worker's hand to the customer's plate may have taken only a few minutes. That was enough to turn a workplace injury into something much worse. The restaurant eventually returned to normal, as businesses always do. The station was cleaned. New ingredients were prepared. The injured worker either returned later or remained away while recovering. Customers continued ordering salads. To people who were not there, the kitchen looked ordinary again. For the employees, the salad station was connected to the memory of the cut, the missing fingertip, and the customer's complaint. Every time someone cut vegetables too quickly, another worker might tell them to slow down. Every time a plate left the station during confusion, someone might remember the salad that should never have reached the dining room. The worker's finger would heal as much as it could, but the missing tip would remain visible. He would look at it and remember the knife. He might also remember that the missing part was never found in the kitchen. The customer would remember for a different reason. They had complained about bacon. They did not want bacon in the salad. What they found was far worse than bacon. I do not know whether anyone ever confirmed with complete certainty that the chewy object was the fingertip. Perhaps it was sent for testing. Maybe the shape or tissue made the truth obvious. Even without formal confirmation, the timing and missing piece made the conclusion difficult to avoid. The salad worker cut off the tip of his finger while preparing food. The fingertip disappeared. The salad he had been making reached a table. The customer found something chewy and believed it was meat. No fingertip was found anywhere else. There are not many possible explanations. The story became one of those restaurant incidents that people never forget. Most customers have no idea what can happen behind kitchen doors. They see clean plates arriving at the table and assume the process is controlled. Usually, it is. But kitchens are fast, crowded, and filled with sharp tools. A few seconds of confusion can allow something terrible to move from one area to another. That evening, a knife slipped. A worker went to the hospital. A plate escaped the kitchen. A customer complained about an unwanted piece of bacon, and somewhere between the cutting board and the table, the missing tip of a man's finger disappeared into a salad. The customer had already started chewing before anyone understood what it probably was. The stories may be over, but some nights do not end when the video does. The people you heard tonight were not looking for fear. They were living normal lives until one moment changed the way they saw the world around them. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the longest. Subscribe to Nockmeyer Witness for more true accounts from people who saw something they wish they could forget. Good night, and if you wake up suddenly, do not assume it was just a dream.